has started to open doors. So my colleagues in the Royal College of Pathologists who produced what are called as the minimum data sets for all the major cancers. So these are the set of instructions for all pathologists as to what you must do with all the analysis of all cancers. And the one for bowel cancer was issued, updated in July last year. So that now says you will test all bowel cancers up to the age of 50. The case is grade A, on large part on the basis of Tristan's work, but also on the basis that testing for MSI helps oncologists and it improves prognostic prediction and all that. It says that the case is made for testing up to the age of 70, but because commissioning is not yet in place in the NHS, we will not yet insist on it. And it's important that we get a foot in the door and we start to prove this is worth it, because what's really scaring the horses is the amount of colonoscopy this will generate. But they haven't quite realised the amount of surgery it will stop doing. So there will be surgeons and people who have time to change what they do in their life. And it's like Australia. It's there at the moment before it was discovered, and we ought to get at it. So that is really good. And because of the likes of that, in July 2014, so in discussions with Bowel Cancer UK, they issued a Freedom of Information request to all NHS trusts and health boards as to where they were with compliance last October. And that reported by the end of the year. And in February, they wrote to the chief medical officers of all 4 national health services in the UK, telling them how uncompliant their services were and asking for their plans for full implementation, please. Now, that resulted in me getting a very nice email, thank you, from the Welsh Health Policy Unit of the Welsh Government, courtesy of the Chief Medical Officer of Wales, saying, yes, we acknowledge we are privileged to have Dr. Ian Frayling in our books, and I will ask him to set up a working group in Wales to determine not whether we do it, but how we do it. Because I told them there is no choice on whether we do it. If we don't do it, pathology services in Wales get their accreditation pulled. So that is a really good, hard driver. I know that colleagues in Scotland were slightly ahead of me. They've already put a report together because they've got a local zealot in the form of Malcolm Dunlop. And I know some regions in England are already going ahead with it, which is the perfect postcode lottery for, oh, what about everyone else then? I'm sorry, I'm just not sure about what's happening in Northern Ireland, but this has really opened doors, and I have a meeting in Wales on Monday afternoon with the National Specialty Advisory Group for Cancer. So I'll rope them in on the working group I've been put in charge of. Okay, so it's good to know that finding just the index cases is worth it, and it gets a bit better when you test some relatives. It shows that chasing family histories is actually better than doing nothing, but systematic testing would be better still at finding cases. We're not denying that we need to investigate people with family histories. They may not be lynched, there may be a lot of other things. But while systematic testing is better, it is not perfect. It will not find all cases of lynch, but it is a start and it is much better. Testing of other tumours, yeah, as Tristan said, we need to look at that. Would gene testing be the ultimate test? Well, the next generation of gene testing is already coming in, and I've been contacted by a colleague in a major UK laboratory not 4 kilometres from here, who said, I can now do all 4 genes for a basic test cost of 150 quid. So why don't we go to the MRC, get a big grant, and see whether it would just be worthwhile sequencing everybody coming past our doors. It might be. We'd have to look into all the ethics and how you approach that and deliver it to people. But if the Angelina Jolie effect can take in Lynch syndrome, maybe that will become, you know, something to do. But at least we could prove that, well, the nuts and bolts work, and if it is that way, okay. It provides input to guidelines regarding prophylactic surgery, like gynae surgery, because that's on the brink of being, you know, clinically effective. Is it cost effective? We need to look at that. And we need more work on the psychological impacts of testing, which is really good that Selena's here today. And work abroad. It complements the Dutch findings. They looked at one testing strategy rather than half a dozen, as we did. They picked the best one, and they found that if they test up to 70, they would test 8 times more to find 4 times more lynch. that's because above age 70, actually, only a very small proportion of bowel cancers are due to Lynch, and it gets lost in the noise. So it'd be far better to put your resources to testing all the endometrials, all the ovarians, all the gastrics, everybody who's had two of anything. Work is ongoing in Europe with my colleagues using the PENTAG model to determine the cost effectiveness in every other country in Europe. Then we go to the European Commission and ask them why they're not doing it. The Australian MRC has granted $500,000, their dollars, so that's about £250,000, on the issue, which will complement the PENTAG model and intended UK work. That will look at implementation and endometrial cancer, and we should start getting complementary work that way. So I'm off there in June and July to spend a couple of weeks in a rough hotel in Sydney overlooking the harbour, I'm afraid, which is a bit rough. We've been able to issue an Australian position article, which anybody can read because that's free online, and our Danish colleagues, being socially extremely responsible persons, and of whom we share a lot in genetic common anyway, have got some really interesting results. They set this up a couple of years ago. All 15 hospitals in Denmark now test all bowel cancers because they decided, oh, just test everything. Because there wasn't the evidence yet to cut it off at 70. So this may be the only time we ever get this experiment done. And they've shown that 3.3% of all bowel cancer in Denmark is due to Lynch syndrome. So if you reckon that 5% of the population gets bowel cancer, and 3% of it is due to Lynch, and then you double it to allow for the fact that not everybody with Lynch gets bowel cancer, you find that 0.3% of the population have Lynch. That's 1 in 300 people. And on the way to this room from breakfast, it suddenly occurred to me, I don't know why, how many MPs do we have to elect? So 2 or 3 of them will have it, and with 90% probability, they won't know they've got it. I think that's quite a good driver, actually. And what they found is that it's really interesting. As Angela made the point, in clinics, you've got MSH2s and MLH1s, some MSH6s, and a few PMS2s. But when you go testing all the cancers without the bias of expecting people to jump over the hurdles of the Amsterdam criteria to get into clinic, what do you find? You find more of everything, but you actually find more MSH6 and PMS2s than the MSH2s and MLH1s. Because they're all out there, but they've got rather different family histories, not quite so definite. So that is really interesting, biologically, if nothing else. The genes are almost the same size, so you would expect there to be the same number of mutations. It's actually about the same proportion of people in the population who have mutations in another bowel cancer gene called MUC1. And it's about twice as common as the best estimate of BRCA. So we should be seeing not 5 times more breast as bowel, but actually twice as much Lynch as BRCA, if the representation of people being put forward to clinics is proportional. Okay, just to finish. We have a better, complementary way of finding Lynch. In Wales, it would mean currently we are funded for 120 referrals, and we find 10 new families a year. If we tested all 110 under 50 bowel cancers, we'd find another 10. So that's a doubling of the ascertainment for only an 8% increase in referrals. And if we didn't see a few referrals in genetics of the more moderate kind, we could easily accommodate them. The PENTAG report has been instrumental in changing RC-BAT guidelines. This is already providing input to national policies and changing it. There's still much work ahead to implement this, but we're on the right track. I should point out that the National Screening Committee have now finally sat up and taken notice. They've set up a subcommittee on the issue of the provision of surveillance colonoscopy nationally as part of the National Bowel Cancer Screening Programme, because that is all quality control. Because they realise now they can't avoid it anymore. This has to have something done about it. And the view on the block is, and this was volunteered by a senior civil servant in Wales, that funding for systematic testing would be engineered through national screening. So people don't argue about individual bits of budget, and it gets funded nationally with all the quality control demands that comes with that. So that's really, really good. So I think we've finally got them. And actually, I got an answer to a really interesting biological question. How common is this? We used to think it was 1 in 15,000. Now it's 1 in 300. So it's no longer a rare thing, it's common. It's like diabetes, thyroid disease. So, you know, the time is right. We go for it because it will have maximal benefit. And we're all paying for the consequences of not knowing about it. Okay, I'll leave it there.
Sorry, just a quick thing before you go to lunch, and I'm sure you're all really, really hungry. We want to do more research, and part of doing more research is getting your views and getting you to come and help us do the research. I had some slides, I don't have time. I've got some flyers, so please come take a flyer. There's a bit on there where you can say what issues do you think should be researched. You can write on that, you can give it to me, or there's a postal address, whatever. And then also we'd love for you to get more involved, so to keep in touch with us and to help us do better research and to make it more likely that we'll get this research funded. So please definitely come and find me, because I'm normally standing alone. Oh.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. Lunch will be served downstairs.